I trust you found that to be so, that in spite of it all, there is something about it that we think that somehow we're going to reach this point where we have no problems. Somehow that everything is just going to start going smoothly from some point in the future on out. And the reality is, because of the fall of Adam, we're going to have problems. We just will. And there's nothing that we can do that makes us lead a trouble-free life. So that sounds discouraging. Well, I guess if you look at it a certain way, it may sound discouraging to you, but it is really true. In spite of it all, God's still blessing. You should be able to look around, and your overall situation may yet still be rectified. Your problems may still be there, but I tell you what, you should be able to see God and God moving. If His mercies were new this morning, if His compassions didn't fail this morning, you saw God. So let us maybe do a little level reset here and say, okay, yes, your prayer request might still be outstanding as far as it being completely resolved. But if you saw God this morning, if you experienced His new mercies, God is moving in spite of it all. Thank the Lord. Matthew 16, please. Thank you. All right, Matthew 16, we will read 21, 22, and 23. Matthew 16 has a lot of good in it, and a lot of times we read there in the middle of the chapter, we talk about the church, the fact that Christ built His church, and I will say this evening, it's not our burden at all, but God has built a church. He has. And the gates of hell shall never prevail against it. That means we can have victory no matter what is thrown our way. That means that God will always have a pure people, no matter what happens or who does this, all the things that the devil could bring the game of what ifs to. I'm glad that God has always had a church. But right after that passage that we're so familiar with, in verse 21, it says, "From that time forth began Jesus to show unto his disciples how that he must go into Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised up again the third day." That revelation, that understanding that Jesus taught to His disciples, that's full of a lot of yucky stuff. From a human perspective, okay, He's got to suffer at the hand of the elders and the chief priests and the scribes. He's got to be killed. And, depending on how you look at it, with human eyes, being raised again the third day, I would say that's a good thing. But, man, you have to die first. It says, verse 22, "Then Peter took him and began to rebuke him." Oh, Peter, saying, "Be it far from thee, Lord. This shall not be unto thee." Peter meant well. It's like in the South, if you hear someone say, "Bless their heart," they're not actually trying to invoke a blessing on that person. It's more of a, "Oh, wow, poor is them," kind of thing, okay? So it says, he said, "This shall not be unto thee." Verse 23, "But Jesus turned and said unto Peter, Get thee behind me, Satan. Thou art an offense unto me. For thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men." Peter, at that time, I don't think he fully comprehended what God's will was for Jesus. He was beginning to understand some stuff. He believed that Jesus was the Son of God earlier in the chapter. Peter meant well in verse 22, but it was wildly misplaced. And he meant well because he didn't want Jesus to go through the things that Jesus had described in verse 21. He didn't want to see Jesus suffer at the hands of the elders and the chief priests and the scribes. He didn't want to see Jesus die at their hand. And so, as we already said, to the human eye, all of those things look to be something that should be avoided. I think most of us would like to avoid suffering if we can, right? Do you just love suffering? I didn't think so. But we know the task that Jesus was assigned, don't we? And we know that he had a will of his Father to fulfill. And if Jesus didn't go through and do what the will of the Father would have him to do, salvation wouldn't have been made available to you and I. Okay? And so, Jesus was the Son of God. True? And he was going to do the will of God. But there was enough humanity in him that I think the humanity side of him wanted to avoid what he knew was coming. A la Garden of Gethsemane. Let this cup pass from me. But look at verse 23. Jesus' response to Peter was, "Get thee behind me, Satan." He put Peter on the level of Satan. And he said, "Thou art an offense unto me." Those are strong words. We think about the word offense. You ever heard someone say, "I'm offended"? You ever said those words, "I'm offended"? Okay. When we think of offense, we think specifically of, or we use the word to describe an emotional reaction that we experienced at the hand of someone else. If you said, if I said, "Brother Rick offended me this afternoon," I am trying to describe an emotional reaction that I had at his, whatever he did or whatever he said. So, for example, I might say, "I'm offended." And we may be trying to say that our feelings were hurt, that somehow we felt like, or we actually did I received an insult from Brother Rick, and say, "I'm offended. I'm offended by what Brother Rick did." The crux of my thought tonight is I want us to understand that the way we use the word offense and the way that Jesus used the word offense in verse 23, it's very different. And the reason is our languages continue to change. The English language is not set in stone. And so, to that point, we have new words, and words and their definitions begin to drift. That is why I like to use the Webster 1828 dictionary, just because it's a little bit of that older English, and sometimes it really helps me understand the old use of the words. So bear with me for a minute. I'm going somewhere with this, okay? And so we say today, "I'm offended." I'm experiencing a strong emotional reaction to what Sister Sarah told me, or how she handled me, or what she said to me. In the Bible, the word offense meant something that could make you fall. Specifically, something that was a trap. So he was saying, "Peter, thou art a trap to me." Could be something that brings the opportunity to sin. Could be something that brings the opportunity to get out of the will of God. Mr. Webster defines offense this way. He gives 5 different definitions. 1, it's displeasure, anger, or moderate anger. And that's how we use the word when we say, "He took offense." And that's how a lot of times we use the word today. It's I'm angry at what Brother Rick said to me and how it offended me. But secondly, Webster defines the word offense as scandal, cause of stumbling. We're going to come back to that scandal. He also describes it as any transgression of the law, divine or human, such as a crime or a sin. So we say he committed a criminal offense, right? So he broke the law when he did that. Can also be an injury, can also be an attack or an assault. If you look at verse 23, let's read it again. "And he turned and said unto Peter, Get thee behind me, Satan. Thou art an offense unto me, for thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men." if you go and you use Strong's Bible Dictionary and you look up the Greek word there that was translated into the English word offense, it is, and I'm going to try to pronounce this, but I am not a Greek scholar, so here we go. Scandalon. What word does that sound like? Scandal. What did Webster said? The second definition of the word offense is a scandal. And according to Strong's, they describe that word scandalon that we translate into offense, they describe it as a trap stick, a snare, a bent sapling. And so I want you to picture, have you ever seen a small tree that's still very flexible? Okay. Or maybe a bigger tree that's got a low-hanging limb and it's still very, very flexible. Okay. I want you to picture that sapling, that young tree standing there in the forest, and I want you to go to the very top of that tree and I want you to tie a loop to the top of that tree. And then I want you to bend that tree over so that it's springy, okay, and that the loop hangs down. And then I want you to take the top of that tree that you've turned upside down, and I want you to hook it on a stick that you have pounded into the ground. And then I want you to picture in your mind's eye that some animal that you're hunting, a rabbit, some other small animal, comes along and goes right through that loop, that noose. What happens? That sapling that's bent over is free now from that stake you have in the ground. And what does the tree do? Boing! Okay? And the animal's trapped. The rabbit, the fox, the whatever. And now it's trapped off of the ground. The snare keeper can come along, working his trap line. He can harvest the animal. You have food, you have fur, you have etc. So that word that we translated into offense, or not we, the King James Version translators in 1611, when they translated scandalon into offense, they understood it to mean, the word offense, they understood it to mean that it was a snare. It was a trap. Okay? So back to Peter and Jesus here in Matthew 16. He wasn't saying that, Jesus wasn't saying in verse 23 that Peter insulted him or hurt his feelings. Jesus was saying, Peter, you don't want me to go through this trouble. But what you don't realize, Peter, is what you're doing is, by urging me not to do it, you're urging me to get out of the will of the Father. And so therefore, Peter, you're a trap to me. You're a trap that would cause me to not do what my Father wanted me to do. And if Peter's desire would have been realized, it would have meant that Jesus didn't go to the cross. He didn't want Jesus to go to the chief priests. He didn't want Jesus to die. He didn't want Jesus to have to rise again. And so there would have been no bloodshed of Jesus. There would have been no resurrection. There would have been no salvation. And so it was a snare. And I think there was a part of Jesus when he heard Peter urge him to not go through with it. Those are my paraphrased words. When he urged Peter urged Jesus to not go through it, I think there was a human part of Jesus that didn't want to go through it. And so remember the thought that a temptation is tempting. Has to be. And so I think there was a part of that thought of not going through, of escaping the pain and the suffering and the death and all of that. I think there was part of Jesus that thought, that sounds pretty good to not go through that. And then he realized, wait a minute, I got my Father, and my Father wants me to do some very, very specific things. And so if I listen to Peter, he's going to trap me. If I do what Peter tells me to do, it's going to trap me. Isaiah chapter 8. So this thought of offense is really a trap. Isaiah 8. And we will read 14. And he, speaking of Christ, shall be for a sanctuary, but for a stone of stumbling and for a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel, so Israel and Judah, for a gin and for a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. In Romans chapter 9, Paul cited this scripture, and he says, as it is written, behold, I lay in Zion a stumbling stone and a rock of offense. Whoso believeth on him shall not be ashamed. Now, with the thought that with what we just laid down, that means that the Bible calls Jesus a trap. But he was a trap to those that didn't want truth. Jesus didn't look like the Messiah that they pictured would come. He didn't do the things we talked about this morning. The Jews wanted him to overthrow the Romans. He didn't do what the Jews thought, the Jewish leadership thought that he would do. And so he was a snare. He was a trap. And because Jesus didn't heal or didn't meet their ideals, it became a snare unto him, unto the Jews. They couldn't and wouldn't believe him to be the Messiah. The irony is that the way they thought of their Savior, their help, became a snare or a trap unto them. I want you to understand that there is a trap in offense. You and I have all experienced being offended. If we continue to live, we will at some point, sooner or later, experience more offense. And by that, I mean how we normally think of offense, right? Some emotional hurt, some thing that is done to us that we count as an insult. We will experience that. But I want you to know that there is a trap in that for us. We need to recognize that instead of focusing on our hurt feelings or the insult received, Satan has actually laid a trap for our souls in the offense. And if you consider this, the sneaky part is that we are tempted to focus on the hurt. What do you do when someone has offended you? About all you can think about is the offense. If you're not careful, it will consume your thinking, it'll consume your mind, it'll consume everything you do. It'll start to influence your priorities and your actions. And so we focus on that. We focus on the hurt. We focus on the wrong that we felt was done by the other person. The snare, the trap, is the focus on the hurt or the wrong done by the other person. And it's a snare because, listen, it can get in the way of you being a Christian. A Christian has guidelines of how to live. The Bible tells us how to think. The Bible tells us about forgiveness. The Bible tells us about wrongs that are done to us, real or perceived. The Bible tells us about mercy and grace, doesn't it? And so the trap that the devil lays for us, whether you were truly offended and truly hurt, or whether it was a perceived and the person meant nothing by it, the devil lays a trap inside of that offense. If you're not careful, the wrong that was done by someone else will end up tripping you up as well. The Bible, I didn't put it in my notes, but the Bible, Jesus said, woe to them by whom the offense comes. So if you were to cause an offense, if you were to willingly hurt somebody, the Bible says, woe to you. But the trap is also, if you just go around and Brother Rick offended me, and Brother Rick offended me, and Brother Rick offended me, and how can I get along with him and focus on the things that he said and the things that he did or the things that he didn't do that I thought he should do, then it becomes consuming and it becomes a snare to my soul. It should not be a badge of honor to be an easily offended person. It should not be. If you think back to Jesus and Peter, it It's a little bit like the temptation that had begun to work on Jesus before he rebuked Peter. It is important that we do the will of God, right? We can establish that in Scripture. It's important that we do the will of God. It's important that we handle ourselves in the will of God. So if there is anything that gets in the way of that, it's a problem to us. Does that make sense? Are you following what I'm picking up, what I'm putting down? I think it's the same. So part of the temptation is someone says something to us, willful or accidental, that offends us. Part of the temptation lies in how we're going to handle ourselves. And this is something that, because emotions are involved, is easier said than done. But I'm telling you, if you are easily offended, you are walking in a minefield of problems. If you are walking, if you are easily hurt with your feelings, you are walking amongst a very dangerous situation. You know, it was like in places in the world, they've had long-standing wars, and they have created minefields. Mines, M-I-N-E-S, are little explosive devices that are buried below the surface of the ground. You usually can't see them unless you're very well trained, and even then you may not spot them. But they respond to pressure, or they respond to a tripwire. And all you do is you step on one, it activates the pressure switch, and you have a miniature bomb that goes off below your feet. That's what happened to so many people with the IED threat in Iraq. And people were coming home with amputated arms and amputated legs and horrific injuries. The problem that really gets into your brain is in a minefield, in a battlefield minefield, you don't know where the mines are. And you might walk for 50 feet and be fine. One small step to the left or the right, boom, you have a real problem. Offense is a minefield of a similar making. We can sit in the hurt. We can feel betrayed. But we need to be careful, because that can cause us to end up at the door of bitterness and isolation. Where is God in that? Where is God in that? Ephesians chapter 4. I keep referencing this a lot lately for whatever reason. Ephesians chapter 4. The sooner you learn how to handle your emotions in a godly way, the better it will be for you. Young kids, learn how to handle your emotions, because you have emotions, because you're human. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26, 27. Ephesians 4, 26, 27. Be angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down on your wrath. And we used this thought the other night in one of the crucial conversation lessons. Don't let stuff fester. Don't let it fester. And then in verse 27, he continues, neither give place to the devil. If you are one to be easily offended, you are giving place to the devil. Nobody should be giving place to the devil. It's a bad place to be. Nobody should be giving ground up to the devil. Nobody should be inviting the devil in to tempt you. That's just, can I say it without offending anybody? That's just dumb. It is. And so, if we're not going to give place to the devil, that means that we're going to have to choose to, when someone offends us, we're not going to sit in the hurt, we're not going to sit in the perceived or real betrayal, and we're not, because we don't want to end up at the bitterness and the isolation point. And listen to me, people can get bitter, they can begin to isolate themselves, they shut themselves off from their help, they shut themselves off from the people that will actually encourage them, they'll stop reading their Bible, they'll stop praying, and listen to me, there is nothing godly about that. That is completely an attack of the enemy of our souls. What is it? It's being guided by emotions instead of truth. Are you guided by emotions or are you guided by truth? Hebrews chapter 12. You need to understand, and this is a simple thought tonight, there is a trap in offense. You need to understand that. And the devil will take advantage of the offense brought by someone else. And he will jump all over that. And he'll cause someone else's problem to become your problem. One of the things, and it's maybe this might be a little bit of a preview for upcoming crucial conversation lessons, but listen, we've got to learn how to take some correction without offense. We have got to have some resilience about us so that when God comes down and taps on our heart's door, and maybe he doesn't tap, maybe he's beating on the heart's door, say, listen up, bud. You and I need to have a talk, and you go, You need to be able to take that for the productive intent that it's meant for. When the pastor gets on your case and you feel offended, you can choose to sit in the hurt, but understand there's a trap in the offense taken by something that was intended to help you. Listen to me. Counsel given across the pulpit from a God-called pastor with the Spirit of God is never designed to crush you. I never want my preaching to crush anybody. I do have a responsibility, however, to at times preach things that will be hard to receive. At that moment, you will stand in a Y in the road, and you will have to make a decision. Will I become offended by this, and will I fall for the trap that's inside the offense? Many years ago, we had a visitor here at the church, and I think he was someone who just saw the sign, stopped in. I don't think anybody had invited him, or there wasn't a prior relationship with him, friendship with him. And he sat through the service. And at the end of service, it was announced at some point that we were going to have a meal or food available, maybe that night, I don't remember, in the fellowship hall. And this man was of the opinion that you should never eat in a church. Now, we do reserve this room for worship. We don't eat in here outside of the Lord's Supper and communion, okay? But he was of the opinion that you should never even eat in a fellowship hall in a church. What happened was he became offended by that, and immediately the saints tried to engage him, trying to, just be a friend, be friendly. He just stormed out the door, never to return. There's a trap in offense. And we have got to know, because sometimes the offense comes from somebody else. Maybe they meant it, maybe they didn't. Sometimes the offense comes when we're told something hard. And we got to be careful that the devil doesn't trip us up there. Basically, Jesus was there to deliver the gospel, the good news, right? And the devil used the good news of the gospel to trip some people up. Isn't it just like the devil to twist something that's good and throw it on its head? But some people were tripped up by the gospel that was preached. They became offended, and the temptation and the offense got them. And those people were mainly the Jewish religious leadership, the people we call the scribes, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees. So some offenses are unjustified. Some offenses happen because of the response to truth. Hebrews chapter 12. Did I already give you chapter 12? Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. Wherefore, seeing we are also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, lest ye be wearied and faint in your mind. Ye have not resisted unto blood, striving against sin. And ye have forgotten the exhortation which speaketh unto you as children. My son, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord, nor faint when thou art rebuked of him. We serve God long enough, God will chasten us. And in that good meant inside of the chastening, there will be a trap of offense that we can choose to be tripped up by. He goes on, verse 7. If ye endure chastening or correction, God dealeth with you as with sons. Remember, especially given the eldest son, there was a lot of emphasis at this time on what was passed down, the honor that came upon the son because he was the son of a respected man. There was an honorable position to be the son. And so when it says God dealeth with you as sons, it means that we are in a privileged, a good, a blessed, a well-off place with God. It says, if you endure chastening, God dealeth with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? Any father worth his salt will indeed chasten his children. And this is an oft-quoted idea, but it's something that we need to have refreshed in our mind from time to time. So I'm going to refresh you. Chastening doesn't feel good. Chastening doesn't feel good. But it is important, necessary, and actually a blessing. Because if God is chastening you, you have a relationship with God. Treat you like a son. Verse 8, but if thou be without chastisement, whereof all are partakers, then are ye bastards and not sons. The thought of a bastard, a lot of times it's used as an insult, okay? But it's someone who doesn't have a father, an illegitimate son. And so at this time, if you were an illegitimate son, if you didn't have a father, you were not in a place of privilege. You were not in a place of blessing. You were not in a good place. You were the underdog for the rest of your life. But if you had a father, and you were a legitimate son of him, and you could claim his name, that immediately gave you a leg up in society. And so he's saying, if ye be without chastisement, you're in a bad place. Furthermore, verse 9, we have had fathers of our flesh, which corrected us, and we gave them reverence or respect. Shall we not much rather be in subjection unto the Father of spirits and live? In other words, listen, if we listen to our earthly fathers, shouldn't we all the more listen to Almighty God? And the answer to that should be yes, but the trap of offense. But the trap of offense, if you're not careful, it'll cause you to trip up. God in his love will bring correction, chastisement. And God will teach you some things. God will rebuke you. God will correct you. And it won't feel very good. And you will be in that moment. There will be a split second of crossroads where either you will be tripped up by the trap of offense, or you will accept the correction and realize that God meant it for good. Verse 10, for they verily for a few days chastened us after their own pleasure, but he for our profit, meaning God, for our profit, that we might be partakers of his holiness. Now no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. And then in verse 12 he says, Wherefore, lift up the hands which hang down and the feeble knees. So in other words, buck up, old chum. You be aight. Okay? That's my translation of verse 12. Okay? You'll be all right. Take the correction. Make the change. I have written in the margin on the previous page alongside verse 7, make the adjustment. Just make the adjustment. Chastisement will feel like God hates you, but it's not true. That's the trap. That's the trap. All right? If we continue on, it says, and make straight paths for your feet, lest that which is lame be turned out of the way, but let it rather be healed. Follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. Looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. Verse 15 is really describing what happens when someone is tripped up by the trap in offense. They became bitter, and the bitterness sprung up and defiled their soul. When God corrects us with His truth, we can choose to sit in the hurt. We can also choose to realize that God's correction is actually an indication of His love for us. But remember this, that every time God corrects, the devil lays a snare. Whether it's God uses my voice, my preaching to correct you, the devil's going to lay a snare. And he's going to try to get you. You brothers that have hunted, you know that it's not every time you go out into the woods that you bring home a deer. And if you're a trapper, not every time you set a trap are you going to get something. But what do? You try. So the devil's going to try. The devil's going to try. Every time God corrects, the devil's going to lay a snare. We need to be able to receive correction without offense. We need to. We need to be able to receive correction without giving into the snare that the devil has laid. Because it goes back to that word offense. It goes directly back to a snare that you rigged up to catch yourself some rabbits to eat on in the middle of winter. I was talking with a pastor, and this subject came up. And there was a man who apparently, I haven't read the book, but wrote a book a while back. I think it was in the 90s. And he used a title, and his title, or the thought behind the title, has been just ringing through my head. So hence the lesson tonight, the bait of offense. It's almost like the devil knows how we respond to offense, and so he throws the offense out there just to see if he can get you to be caught up in the snare. Okay? And I wonder how many people have fallen for the bait of offense. I wonder how many people have had their attitudes go down a path that God wouldn't have them to. I wonder how many people have gotten bitter. I wonder how many people have given over to unbelief. I wonder how many people have rejected truth because they fell for the trap of offense. The bait of offense got them in the spiritual warfare. We've been teaching how to have crucial conversations on Wednesday nights. But what if you are the subject of a crucial conversation? What if someone needs to have a hard conversation with you? Well, we can either choose to accept the correction, or we can fall for the bait. We can find ourselves ensnared. But really, it comes down to we're going to choose. Any temptation, you choose. If the devil tempts you to get drunk tonight, you're going to choose yes or no. If the devil tempts you to have an affair next week, you're going to choose yes or no. And in the trap of offense, you're going to choose whether or not you're going to get caught up in that or it'll be for your good. Let's go to 2 Corinthians chapter 2. So remember, when all of the feelings are raw and fresh, very much there, remember that under all of those things, there can be a trap of offense, a snare. Second Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 11. There was a man here. Let's just read it. I had originally wanted to just read verse 11, but let's read verse 1. But I determined this with myself, that I would not come again to you in heaviness. For if I make you sorry, who is he then that maketh me glad, but the same which is made, I can't read that. Sorry by me. There's a mark in my Bible, sorry. Verse 3, and he wrote this same, and I wrote this same unto you, lest when I come I should have sorrow from them, of them whom I ought to rejoice, having confidence in you that my joy is the joy of you all. Out of much affliction and anguish of heart, sounds like Paul was full of emotion. Much affliction and anguish of heart, I wrote unto you with many tears, that not that ye should be grieved, but that ye might know the love which I have more abundantly unto you. But if any have caused grief, so there is this man that had caused grief, a high level of grief to Paul. He said, if any have caused grief, he hath not grieved me, but in part that I may not overcharge you all. Sufficient to such a man is this punishment which was inflicted of many. So that contrariwise ye ought to rather to forgive him and comfort him, lest perhaps such a one should be swallowed up with overmuch sorrow. Wherefore I beseech you that ye would confirm your love toward him. In other words, though this man had offended and grieved Paul, he wanted the saints to extend love to him. What do we do? Think about it. In a congregation, if someone tears somebody down, we have a tendency to, I don't want anything to do with you. You tore my friends down. You tore my fellow saints down. There's that reaction, right? Verse 9, for to this end also did I write, that I might know the proof of you, whether ye be obedient in all things. To whom ye forgive anything, I forgive also. In other words, if you forgive this man, I forgive also. For if I forgave anything, to whom I forgave it, for your sakes forgave I it in the person of Christ, lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. Something was going on at Corinth, and it grieved Paul. I think Paul was offended. Maybe it was someone who was tearing down, maybe he was tearing down the reputation of Paul behind Paul's back. Paul wasn't even there to defend himself, and here he gets word that this man is just tearing him down. And he said, I forgive in Christ, lest Satan should get an advantage of us. Listen to me, we need to be concerned that we handle ourselves in such a way that Satan can't get an advantage of us. So that means we need to be aware of what's going on. Listen to me, saints, so much of this goes back to being self-aware, knowing how the devil is working on you, knowing how you're tempted, knowing how you're thinking, knowing what God says about those things. Listen to me, if you're not able to be self-aware, if you're not able to know where you stand before God, it will be to your soul's detriment. You say, Brother Foltz, it surely can't be that simple. Actually, it really is. So much of it comes down to, can you know what God says about your actions and behavior? Because lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. And so my job is to make you not ignorant or lacking in knowledge about how the devil's going to attack you. Your job is to make sure with that knowledge, the devil can't get an advantage of you. And when it comes to people problems, and it comes to offense, and it comes to wrongs people have done towards you, either real or mistaken, when it comes to the reception of truth, we need to be careful that the devil doesn't get an advantage of us because of the trap of offense. So your job then is to take this information, put it in the back of your brain, and if the devil ever works on you this way, and there's an offense there, know that there's also a trap there, and we've got to handle ourselves right. The good news is, by the grace of God, we don't have to give in to the trap. We can be more than conquerors through Christ who strengthens me. Like, I can do all things. I can go through this. I can be what God wants me to be. I can stay holy. I can overcome. Nothing's too hard for me if I stay in the will of God. But we're going to have to recognize that there is a trap and offense. The problem is, when the offense comes, all the emotions tend to dominate our brain, tend to dominate our thinking, tend to dominate our heart. You got to be able to see past that and understand, all right, I've experienced an offense. I need to be careful here. I need to be careful that I don't fall for the trap that the devil's laying for my soul as well. All right, that's our lesson for tonight. Trust you got something good out of that.